Yay, so what's the plan for today?
Well, last month, Royal Talens, an art supply company in the Netherlands, sent me a box of wonderful supplies. You remember you filmed a video of me unboxing them. Do you remember?
I remember.
Okay. Well, I did some experiments, and today I'm going to talk about one of the products that was in the box called Ecoline brush pens. My set came with 20 different brush pens, 19 colors, and a blender pen. So the first thing I did with my selection of brush pens was to make a little chart with each color. And then I brushed water over each color to see how they worked when they were wet. And I really liked how they dispersed. Almost like watercolor, but they still kept some of their linear qualities. Then the next thing I did was make a color wheel so I could see how they worked, what colors exactly worked on the color wheel, and what were the complements and what were the analogous colors and everything. And then I also tried them. I watched a couple videos and I tried using them as brush pens and for lettering, and I decided, since I'm not a calligrapher, that you needed a bigger example of how to use a bigger example of lettering to use them as lettering pens. And since that's not my focus, I just like to paint scenes, I decided I would try them out painting watercolor scenes. So what I did, this is my first example of what I did. And basically, I used the pens, the yellow, green, and the green, and the turquoise, and I directly painted them. I directly drew with them on my watercolor paper. I used almost like dots and dashes. Then I brushed watercolor over them. And I found that interesting, and I liked it, and I was impressed with the vibrancy of the colors. They're really, really bright. Then I decided to see what would happen if I used them with watercolor paint just to draw on brighter colors when I needed them. So this was another example, and here is yet another example of using them with my regular watercolor paints, and here is a third example. And I liked them, and I thought they were great for vibrancy, especially at the end of a watercolor painting. And sometimes I dotted them on, and sometimes I drew with them. Sometimes I used pressure to get a thicker line, or less pressure to get a thinner line. But I really felt I had a breakthrough when I discovered this technique. I decided, I love how this little drawing came out. The watercolors blended the watercolor pens blended so softly together. And even though the colors are vibrant, they kind of dissolved into one another, and I loved the look of that. So I decided to demonstrate that to you today. So what I have is a watercolor I've sort of started. There was a light watercolor on this in places, and I discovered this tip. What worked best for me using these watercolors, did you see that? I just dipped my brush in the water upside down, was to put the water on the watercolor paper first. Then there were two things you could do for softness. You could either take your brush pen and brush it on a little piece of scrap paper, and then you could take off a little of the paint like that, using it as a palette, and drop that in. But what I loved was how soft it was and how blendable it was onto my paper. And then you can put more water in it to get a lighter shade and pull out some of the colors. Then if you want to go darker again, you can put more in. So I like that technique. You can also use that here. I'm using it in a linear fashion for the trim around the windows, and it worked really nicely. You could, if you wanted to, also draw, as long as your surface was wet. I found that I could get a really nice line that I could then blend. So I kind of used just a light touch of these brushes to get kind of a linear, to show the curving of my roof. But because the paper was already wet, it blended beautifully. And then if I wanted to, I could blend it further with my brush or not. So I also found that I could use them to brighten up things. Like this is a beautiful color, and these are all marked really well. This is a magenta, so they're marked on the brush, and they also have a number. So I found if I wanted just bright flowers out here at the very end, sometimes it's difficult to get this with watercolor paint, sometimes not. I could just use them like that for just a bright touch at the very end. But I love them most of all when I use the water first and then use them afterward, right on top of a watery surface. Like you can see here, I can do something like this. Let's make a bluey, here's a bluey green. Maybe there's a, let me wet this first so you can really see it. So here's water, and then you just dot it on and it just bleeds out and really pretty soft. And you can do that with your bright colors too. Oops. And you can always, now this is wet, the flowers might be reflecting in my window. Look at that. See how they blend out? I just thought they were just really beautiful used wet into wet. So I am going to continue to use them because I love them. I've used other brands of watercolor markers before, and I found that I love these the best because they just disperse so well. The colors are so pretty, and I believe my set was 20, which I think is plenty of colors, but I think they make, if I read correctly, and I'll put a link below this video to where you can check the Royal Talens website, but I believe they come in like over 200 colors. So imagine the fun you can have with that. So thanks so much for watching.